Well, it's time to make another episode of QuickTime Event, and I can't wait. Let me just make a quick check, see how much is in my Steam wallet. Give me a minute. Oh. Huh. Well, we won't let that stop us. Konnichiwa mina, ore wa Jimine, soshite QuickTime Event e yokoso! So you want to download a game, but you're a little lacking in the financial department. Not a problem, or at least so we hope, as we're taking a look at free games in this episode. Now, just to clarify, we're not looking at free demos or shareware or free-to-play games like MMOs where you have to pay to get the full experience. No, these are full games that you can download and play right now without having to bother with all that money nonsense, and here are just a few examples of what I'm talking about.
We'll be traversing mysterious caverns and flinging magical arrows in Ley Lines. Then it's off to an island full of monster people to stop some no-good pirates and reclaim stolen treasure in Khimera, Destroy All Monster Girls. Finally, we'll take a trip to the past to take a trip to the future, as we look at a futuristic shoot-'em-up from the 90s called Stargunner.
でもまずはこれです。Heroine's Quest is an interesting mix of point-and-click adventure and RPG, made by a group called Crystal Shard, whose previous game credits include Starship Quasar, as well as a couple of parody games, one spoofing the Quest for Glory game series, and the other being a riff on Harry Potter, all of them being more traditional point-and-click adventures. The game opens with a quotation.
It seats itself on the lifeblood of fated men. Paints red.
Okay, no, that's fine. You just go right ahead. Don't worry about me. It's not like I was trying to read that or anything. Sheesh, clearly this game was marketed for speed readers. Anyway, after the almost literally blink and you'll miss it quotation, you're presented with the title screen. And upon starting a new game, you name your character, and you're given a choice of 3 character classes: Warrior, Sorceress, and Rogue. In addition to the different playstyles you'd expect, the game also tells you that each class affects certain puzzles, as well as which side quests are available to you.
I actually find that to be an interesting concept, although I never came across that myself, as I only stuck to one class during my brief playthrough, the Rogue. But I'd be interested to go back and play again as one or both of the other classes to see how the game differs.
Interestingly enough, further to that point, it seems you can identify yourself to other people as any of the 3 classes, no matter which one you picked, though again, I never did this, making me wonder what would happen if you essentially lie to someone, say picking a rogue for your class, but telling someone you're a warrior or a sorceress. Upon choosing a class, you're given the opportunity to assign training points to increase some of your character stats, with some of them already having a slight boost based on which class you chose. The stats all have an Elder Scrolls-esque progression to them, meaning you can increase them further simply by using them. There's a good variety of stats, too. Strength, magic, willpower, fast talk, acrobatics, and... Sorry. What the hell is Animal Kin? Is that supposed to be Animal Kin? As in kinship? Or can you summon a Ken furry to drop from the trees and fart out a Hadouken?
Given that the stat relates to how well you deal with animals, it's probably the former, but hell, maybe the Ken furry wouldn't be such a bad idea either. Another thing to note about the stats is that while you can increase each individual stat as you play, you don't appear to be able to actually level up per se, nor have I seen any sign of an XP bar. And you know what? I'm actually okay with that. It makes the progression feel more natural and organic, simply representing your character getting stronger and more skilled naturally, gradually, over time, rather than a standard XP and level system, which, while it has been a staple of games for years, let's face it does basically amount to saying, congratulations, you've done this arbitrary amount of stuff, now you're suddenly stronger.
As mentioned previously, there is a main quest and some side quests, and the method of tracking these quests could have used some improving. Mainly because there is no quest tracking, not automatically anyway. Although there isn't a traditional quest log or journal as in other games, there is an in-game notepad, however it has very limited capacity, so you'd probably be better off using an actual notepad or, well, an actual notepad.
And of course, what would any RPG be without combat? Heroine's Quest has it, and being an RPG point-and-click hybrid, you might think the combat would be as simple and mundane as click the thing till it dies, but it's actually handled fairly well here.
In the default setup, combat is controlled mainly by the buttons surrounding the S key, with S itself not doing anything. Your attack maneuvers are performed with Q, W, E, A, and D, while evasive maneuvers are handled with Z, X, and C. When and if you learn any special moves, those are used via the 1, 2, and 3 keys, while 4, 5, and 6 will use a potion, and escape, well, escapes the battle. Personally, I don't find the setup that awkward to use, but the keys are rebindable.
If I were to sum up the game's overall aesthetic in one word, it would be decent.
The look of the backgrounds and character sprites are roughly the same quality as many of Crystal Shard's other games, evoking memories of titles like King's Quest V and VI. The close-up character portraits are of above-average quality, I'd say. The music did well in matching the mood of the situations, but I'm damned if I can remember any of it. And the voice acting is not that bad either.
This doesn't appear to be a short game either, especially with potentially different playthroughs for different character classes. Now, while it's kind of difficult to tell exactly how far I've gotten in the game, there is a day-night system present. And when I stopped playing, I was on the morning of day 4 with a score of 27 out of 500. And this was after about 2.5 hours of playtime. Heroine's Quest is a great game for fans of RPGs and point-and-clicks alike, and if there were an actual price tag attached to it, I'd probably happily pay it. I'm in a bit of a quandary. I really wanted to like this game. I did. I really, really wanted to like it. It looked promising. It had an interesting premise, but it was just executed so wrongly. Yet at the same time, the game was a student project, so I don't want to be too hard on it. Perhaps I should start from the beginning.
Ley Lines is a short puzzle platformer in which you control a character who wields a bow that fires magical arrows, the properties of which change via the titular ley lines, colored gates which imbue the arrows with certain powers. The inhabitants of this world have lost their connection to a giant energy crystal located in a temple called Miria's Heart, and restoring the world to normal is the task of your character, who was apparently summoned from everyone's hopes and dreams. A bit like Captain Planet, only if all the Planeteers were Mati.
Yeesh. What a scary thought.
The core gameplay is very simple, and indeed the first section of the game is a cleverly disguised tutorial on each of the different powers you'll need to traverse the world. There are 5 powers in all: gravity, time, bridge, warp, and levitation. They all do exactly what the names imply, but time and warp both had extremely limited use. In fact, past the tutorial section, I only used time once, and while I did see a warp gate, there didn't appear to be any reason for it.
Speaking of things with no apparent reason for existence, let's move on to these crystals. There are 20 of these golden crystals scattered throughout the temples. What are they for? Good question, I sure as hell couldn't tell you. There's no indication given as to their significance. No pop-up message saying collect all 20 and X will happen. You don't need a prerequisite number to get into the final area, they're just there. Now I don't mind going and collecting random items in my games, but just give me a reason to do so.
The game has a few technical flaws as well. For instance, the controls are not rebindable, and even though the game is capable of switching from full screen to windowed, there's no option for it in the menu. Instead, you have to press alternate enter, and even then it's stuck at 1920 by 1080. Up till now, I've neglected to bring up these bug-like creatures. These serve as the game's enemies. I bring them up here as it was thanks to them I spotted a couple of more problems. Firstly, your character apparently has limited health. I say apparently because these things are capable of firing cubes, some of which managed to hit me, and after about the 3rd hit, my character died. Yet despite that, there's no health bar or other such obvious indication of how much health my character has.
Now before you eviscerate me in the comments, I do have a correction to make, and I'm doing it in the form of a jump cut here because at this late stage in the production, it's easier than just trying to rewrite the script and re-recording the voiceover. So anyway, after I got done recording the VO for this episode, I recorded the game a second time because I wanted to try to get better footage, because my first run through wasn't a very good quality. The frame rate was very choppy. But I noticed a couple of things. One, there actually is a health meter. It's a little easy to miss because it's not where you'd expect to find it. In the bottom left of the screen, you'll see the icon for whatever power you happen to be using. And that icon has a solid background color, and that background color is your health meter. It'll drain each time you get hit, and it recharges over time. So, like I said, that was my fault. I just missed that the first go through. Also, if you happen to want to make a review of this game yourself, word to the wise. Don't use Bandicam's window capture mode to get footage of the game and then exit out of the game and start a new one in the middle of the recording. Why? You'll probably screw up the recording. Specifically in my case, the video froze at the moment of when I exited the game, but the audio still kept going. I don't know, go figure. Anyway, back to the review.
Also, during my first playthrough of the game, it tended to get a bit buggy, no pun intended, and some of the cubes glitched through the floor. Lastly, there's the camera. It was fine for much of the game, if perhaps a tiny bit too close to the character model, but still, you could look around with the mouse or right analog stick on a controller. But there was one point when the game suddenly switched to a fixed camera angle, which threw off the controls and almost caused me to walk off a cliff. My question is, naze? This is literally the only point in the game that it does this, not counting the occasional quick cutscene, and there was absolutely no reason for it. No reason I couldn't have gone to this area with the camera still behind my character and in my control.
Now, as I said at the beginning of this segment, Ley Lines was a student project being developed by students at the Florida Interactive Entertainment Academy. And at the very least, I certainly recognize and applaud the effort that went into making the game. I know I certainly couldn't do anything on this level. Well, I still struggle when playing around on RPG Maker. But at the same time, I am here to review games, free or otherwise. And my final opinion is that I just can't recommend Ley Lines. There's very little to it, and what is there either makes no sense or just isn't very satisfying. Despite its title, Khimera, Destroy All Monster Girls, is not the porno version of the Godzilla movie Destroy All Monsters. Rather, it is a 2D platformer adventure with 16-bit inspired pixel graphics and a well-written story that's brimming with humor.
The treasury of Ragaza, a town on Morgana Island which is home to all manner of monsters, is broken into by a pirate naga named Serpentina. Bernadette, the town's one and only cop, tries to stop her but isn't really up to the job. In fact, she loses her head over the matter. Literally. Bernadette goes to see the Professor, the sole human on Morgana Island. She commandeers a chimera the Professor happens to be developing, but the Professor first has to make a bit of genetic alteration to it, as the chimera was designed as basically a glorified maid. That genetic alteration? A gigantic stone arm. With her new arm and new programming in place, Chelsea, that's the chimera's name by the way, sets off to nab Serpentina and return the treasure. Only it turns out Serpentina wasn't the only one involved in the robbery, and there are more pirates all over Morgana Island, so Chelsea has to find and capture them as well.
Chelsea's asymmetrical design, with her giant stone arm and one of her horns being broken off, certainly makes her stand out, and as a result, she doesn't look like just some generic video game character. She has her own unique identity. And I have to give the developers props for their attention to detail with Chelsea's character sprite. Here she is as she appears when facing to the right. Now, with this being a free pixel art platformer, it would have been so easy to fall into the trap of just horizontally flipping the sprite to make her appear to look the other way, but the devs didn't do that here. When you turn to the left, the giant stone arm and the broken horn are now both facing away from the camera. It's a small detail, I know, but one which I very much appreciate, which is why I think it's a bit of a shame that this level of detail didn't extend to other major characters like the bosses. But then, as their character designs are somewhat more symmetrical than Chelsea's, I can look past it.
And if you feel like changing up her look somewhat, you can unlock new costumes for Chelsea, most of which are merely cosmetic, with the exception of this one. This will put you into Berserk mode, which lets you deal extra damage, while at the same time taking extra damage yourself. The music in Khimera is overall a nice blend of 8-bit chiptunes and synth instruments. Quite often I found myself bobbing my head or tapping my foot to the beat while playing through the levels. It kinda makes me sad that the only DLC available for the game is an extra costume for Chelsea, as I would have bought this soundtrack without hesitation if it were actually being sold.
Chelsea has a nice variety of abilities at her disposal, both when you first start your adventure and as you progress through it.
Initially, Chelsea is able to perform a weak attack and a strong attack. She can also use a dash attack, which can be done either with a single button or by pressing, of all things, up in tandem with your weak attack. She can pound the ground to cause a short earthquake, go all Scrooge McDuck on enemies and use her fist for a pogo attack, and, as of a recent update to the game, perform a double jump.
However, taking a bit of inspiration from Mega Man, as she defeats bosses, Chelsea gains new abilities from their DNA.
These abilities range from firing pizza sauce at enemies. Yes, I said pizza sauce, it makes more sense in context. Actually, that's a lie, no it doesn't, but what the hell, we'll go with it. To dropping down on enemies in a giant treasure chest, which also protects Chelsea from almost all hazards.
Khimera is playable with either the keyboard or a gamepad. Now, as far as default control mappings are concerned, the gamepad is definitely the simpler and more traditional of the two, with all the buttons doing what you might expect. A for jumping, X and B for your weak and strong attacks, the control stick for moving, etc. With the keyboard, however, things get a little weird.
W, A, S, and D are involved, but not for movement. That's done with the arrow keys. Instead, S and D are for your weak and strong attacks, A jumps, and W is the shortcut for performing the dash attack, with Q strangely being the pause button.
It's certainly not the most awkward of control schemes, but it is still a little strange and could understandably lead to a few frustrating moments. Thankfully, this is easily rectified as the keys are rebindable.
Although, even with the gamepad plugged in, things are a bit strange, as the game still has you press F1 if you want to look at the controls.
Usually, when I play a game for QuickTime Event, I don't play the whole thing, just enough to get the gist of what the game is about and to be able to tell you certain key points about the game within a short time frame. But I enjoyed Khimera Destroy All Monster Girls way more than I expected to, and I actually had to force myself to stop playing so I could write about it.
I was expecting an experience that would have been kind of fun, maybe an hour long at most, but which would end up being a bit forgettable. But what I got was a highly enjoyable experience, with a memorable cast of characters, funny dialogue, and a satisfying amount of challenge to it. Oh, and my playtime? Around 3.5 hours, and that's just in the main game, as there are more modes in the game's extras menu that you could play through as well.
Do yourself a favor, play this game, and check out some of the developers' other projects on their website as well. At the time of this recording, they're working on another title, which will have an actual price tag attached to it, so I'll be interested to see if the quality of the new game can match that of Khimera. Apogee Software was founded in 1987, and throughout the company's lifetime they published numerous classic titles, like the Commander Keen series, which we looked at last time, as well as the Duke Nukem series, Rise of the Triad, and Wacky Wheels. But in the mid-90s it became clear that 3D was the future of gaming, and Apogee embraced that future with open arms, developing all future titles using a 3D engine and changing their name to 3D Realms. The last title published under the Apogee name in 1996 was a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up called Stargunner, which was made freeware in 2005, hence its inclusion in this episode. So, do I think Apogee went out with a bang? Or a whimper? Let's see.
The basic story of Stargunner is set during a war between the planets Itima and Xyle. The Xylians are preparing for an all-out attack against the Itimians, and so, to counteract this threat, the Itimians create a squad of elite pilots called Stargunners, whose mission it is to destroy the 3 strongholds on Xyle where their attack forces lie in wait. The game has 34 stages divided across 4 episodes. There are also 3 difficulty settings, but really the only difference between them is the amount of lives you start out with. I've heard it said that easier settings reduce the number of enemies, but to be honest, I couldn't see any appreciable difference. Before each stage begins, you're given the opportunity to spend credits to upgrade your ship with weapon attachments, defensive satellites, and better engines. You can also buy additional lives as well as nukes, which I'll get into shortly. Controlling the game is as basic as it gets. You move around with the arrow keys. Control fires your primary weapon, which comes in one of 2 varieties. Pulse, which fires straight ahead of you, and Plasma, which fires in a spread pattern and is also the weaker of the 2. Each variety can be powered up several times. Lastly, Alternate lets off a nuke if you have one available. Nukes are the game's screen-clearing weapon, of which you can have up to 4 at any time. If you get hit, you'll lose shield power, which is your health in this game. And losing all of your shield power not only costs you a life, but knocks your primary weapon power down 1 level.
The object of each stage is simply to get to the end and defeat the boss. Actually, simply is probably the wrong word entirely to use there, as there are a crapload of enemies and environmental hazards between you and said boss, and even assuming you manage to get to the boss, they're more often than not incredibly difficult to take down, and most frustratingly of all, can usually take you out in one hit, even if you're at full health.
But of course, shooting enemies isn't the only thing you can do. There are also pickups that you can, well, pick up. Interestingly enough, the pickups can give you one of two things, which you can change by shooting it before you collect it.
One such pickup flips between pulse and plasma, and depending on what your weapon is set on at the time, will either power your weapon up or switch to the other setting. Now this is the only way to change your weapon setting in the game, and I'm really not a fan of it. See, I personally prefer the pulse setting, which means if I grab a pickup accidentally with the plasma setting, I'm screwed, unless I can find another pickup and change it back to pulse. I would have preferred if there were a way to just change the weapon setting at will, as although I don't like the plasma setting as much, I do realize that it is better suited to certain situations.
Other pickups will give you more credits to spend at the store, which you can also find in the form of green crystals from destroying enemies, or more points, while still others will restore your shield, give you another nuke, or in rare cases an extra life or even invulnerability. If you try to collect a nuke when you already have 4 stocked up, the extra nuke will instead be set off then and there, ensuring it doesn't go to waste. There's also a mystery pickup, which gives you one of the other items at random.
I will admit, my overall opinion of Stargunner is probably a little biased based on my experience with the difficulty, but personally, I just couldn't get into it. Visually, it's too busy, and from a gameplay standpoint, it just seems a bit overly tough, no matter what weapon emplacements I attach to my ship or what difficulty setting I played on. If you feel you're up to the challenge, by all means, give it a shot. I mean, what the hell, it's free. But otherwise, I'd say steer clear of it. That'll do it for this episode of QuickTime Event. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure and check out my Facebook and Twitter pages, and be sure and leave a comment there or here if you'd like to see a more detailed review of any of these games, or suggest a game or a theme for a future episode. Even if it's another free game, just because I did this episode on them doesn't mean I won't do another one sometime down the road. In the meantime, I invite you as always to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Onegaishimasu, and thank you so very much for watching. Jikai made. Sayonara.